Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's From Theory to Practice, where I take a look at the research so you don't have to. Now, the article I've selected this week is an oldie, but a goodie. It's from 1980. It's called Perceptions of the Impact of Negatively Valued Physical Characteristics on Social Interaction by Kleck and Strenta. Now, why have I selected this? I selected this paper, one, because it's really interesting, but two, it also shows great thinking on the part of the researchers, something I think a lot of us are lacking in modern research. Now, if you're used to these videos, you know I typically start with a theme and then I use the research to highlight that theme. But today I'm going to flip it around. I'm going to jump right into the paper and together hopefully we're going to come up with our own themes from it. So what does this paper do? This paper looks at basic social interactions. So they had two people speak for 6 minutes. Now, what were the different conditions? So one group of incoming participants was told to act as though they believed they had some sort of mild allergy, something easily treated with medication, while another group was told to act as though they had a facial scar. And they weren't just told this, in fact, they were given one. So each of these participants was sat down in a chair before the conversation, and using makeup, the researchers applied a facial scar. They then went into the conversation. Now, both of these groups was told, do not explicitly mention any of this. Don't talk about your allergy. Don't talk about your facial scar. Just keep these things front of mind as you have this 6-minute discussion. After the discussion was over, both of these groups were asked to rate your conversation. How well do you think that 6-minute conversation went on a bunch of different levels? And here were some of the highlights. So they were asked to rate on a scale of 0 to 14. 14 great, 0 low. One dimension was tenseness. How tense do you think the conversation was? People in the allergy group, 2.3. People in the facial scar group, 8.0. They thought the conversation was significantly more tense. What about comfort? People with a facial scar felt the conversation was less comfortable. Attractiveness? People with a scar believed that the person they were speaking with found them significantly less attractive. Liking? People with a scar felt they were liked less. And when they asked about gaze measures, people with a scar thought that the person they were talking to was looking at them more often, more weirdly. But here's the big twist. The people who had the makeup facial scar applied, without them knowing before they went into the conversation, the researchers removed it. So what they did is they put on the scar, they showed the person, does the scar look good to you? They said, oh yeah, that looks scary. Then before going into the conversation, the researchers said, ooh, let me just touch that up. And they erased it. The people went in thinking they had a scar, but they actually had nothing on their face. So all of these ranks, all of these differences in ranking the conversation came from up here. They didn't really come from out here. Now, here's where the researchers got good. Here was their first bout of good thinking. They said maybe this is just an issue of visibility and severity, right? An allergy is invisible and not really severe, whereas a scar is visible and typically considered severe. So what they did is they got a new group of people, and instead of saying you have an allergy, they said, imagine you have epilepsy. Now, again, this is invisible just like an allergy, but it's far more severe. It's more similar to a scar in terms of severity and belief that other people might judge you because of it. So this new group had a conversation, same thing, rate your conversation. On tenseness, they rated as high as the scar group. On comfort, on par with the scar group. Attractiveness as low as the scar group. Liking actually lower than the scar group. And when it came to that gaze measure, they kind of landed somewhere right in between the scar and the allergy group. So here we see it can't just be a visibility thing. People who thought they had epilepsy, an invisible condition, had the same negative reactions as someone who thought they had a facial scar. But that's when good thinking example from these researchers, part 2, came in. Now they said, well, wait a second. Is this a self-fulfilling prophecy or is it just perceptual bias? And here's what they mean. If you think you have a scar or epilepsy, do you start to act differently? And by acting differently, does that then cause your partner to act differently? Or is it all perceptual bias? Is it just in your head that you're thinking this? So is something actually changing or not? So what they did is they had a group of people watch the videos of the conversation and rate it themselves, but they weren't told anything. They weren't told about the allergy, about epilepsy, about scars. They were just told, watch our confederate, watch the researcher in this discussion and see, do you think this person acts differently conversation to conversation? And what did they find? Absolutely not. They weren't able to tell any difference between any videos. So this suggests that it's probably not the person is acting different, which is leading the confederate, the researcher, to act different in these conversations, because they appear to be acting identically. Which brings us into good bout of thinking round 3. What if the raters weren't blind? What if we told the people rating these videos that one group has an allergy and one group has a facial scar? Just thinking this, would they rate it differently? And what did they find? Absolutely, they did. Just by being told one of the people has a scar, one of the person has allergies, something that they used to rank as identical, they started to shift. And they started to say the Confederate and the scar group started to act differently. So this looks even more like it's a perceptual bias thing. What do you believe is going to happen? And in their final bout of good thinking, to tackle that actual change versus perceived change debate, they did this. They had groups of people rate the video for the allergy group. Only the people who were told you have allergies. Those are the only videos they watched. Except some raters were told this person has an allergy, and some raters were told this person has a scar. Now remember, they were all watching the same exact videos. And how did these people rate these videos? On tenseness, almost 2.5 greater. Comfort lower, attractiveness lower, liking lower, gaze measure higher. We see the exact same thing. Identical film, different description. Congratulations, we're looking at a perceptual bias, not a real world shift. So now then, let's start to bring this back to us. What might this mean for us as teachers? And hopefully you're already starting to get some of your own ideas. But here are a few that were bubbling up in my head. One, if you've worked with me before, you know I always say our stories are the basis of everything we perceive. This feeds right into this. What are your stories about yourselves, your abilities, other people? Do they like you? Do they not like you? These stories are going to shift the way your brain literally perceives, processes the world. You're going to see things, hear things, smell things differently than other people to match that story. Your stories drive your perceptions, not the other way around. So what are our stories? What are our students' stories? How does this all link into school? And I think one kind of big thing that keeps popping up is this strengths versus weaknesses. There's a big movement of strengths-based education, which I'm all for, but there is a possibility that if you focus only on strengths and you never address weaknesses, those weaknesses will continue to change your perception and they will grow in severity simply because nobody ever had a chance to bridge the gap between a perceived story and reality. At some level, we have to bounce our stories against the real world if we ever want to bridge that gap. Another thing that I was thinking about is this idea of prior knowledge. We all know prior knowledge is key to learning, and now we're starting to see why. Your prior knowledge, your stories, those things you possess will change the way you perceive new learning, new things coming at you. And so as teachers, I think the important thing to remember is what prior knowledge do our students have, but also what are we activating? Is there certain prior knowledge we can bring online early within a class, early within a segment, that we know will guide how they perceive the rest of the lesson, and it will help them perceive it in a way that makes it easier for them. So not just what information do they have, but what information are we bringing online to drive later perception? And I also think it's worth thinking about this. We can't win them all. If everyone's got their own kind of stories and that's driving their perception, regardless of what we are doing as human beings, then this means the exact same thing we do for different people, we're never going to be able to get everyone on board. Some things we do are simply going to fall flat for certain people. Now, I learned this best by doing YouTube. Sometimes I'll go through and read the comments, always a big mistake. And I'm shocked by what some people take away from my videos. Some of the comments will say, I can't believe you said this, or I can't believe you believe this, which had nothing to do in my mind about anything I said or did on the video. It's their perception. Nothing about me changes, nothing about the world changes, but what they're bringing to the table changes their literal perception of what I'm saying. And in some instances, that's a good thing. In some instances, that's a bad thing. And luckily in a classroom, as opposed to YouTube, we have more chance to interact with our students, build relationships with them. But I think it's okay to acknowledge that, look, we're not going to get all of them on side. Some people's stories are simply going to clash so strongly with who we are, how we act, how we teach, that we might never be able to bridge that gap. If we can influence most people most of the time, that might be the best we can ask for. And I want to end with a final kind of thought. Education is broken. This is the primary story being told around the world at most conferences I go to. School is broken. Education is broken. We need a revolution. How is this story significantly coloring people's perceptions of what we do on a day-to-day basis? We can tell them all day we're doing good. We can even bring them into our classroom and show them the good work we're doing. But as we just learned, 100 people watching the same exact lesson can see 100 different things based on their own internal stories and perceptions. So how do we push back against this story? What does this all mean? Unfortunately, I don't really know. This is just an idea that's bubbling in my mind that I wanted to share with you. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you got something good from that. If you'd like to keep up on the work we're doing, you can take a look at us at www.lmeglobal.net. Or if you really like this Science of Learning content, you can take a look at our award-winning Science of Learning programs for teachers and students called The Learning Blueprint. Otherwise, thank you all so much, and I'll see you at the next video.